So there's this whole thing on the internet now about cultural Marxism. It's a big talking point of the alt-right forces, but not just them, of like other conservative forces. The cultural Marxism, right? This idea that the gay rights movement, that feminism is all a conspiracy by communists, right? And that the general response, I've seen Salon.com and the New York Times and other people say, well, this is an anti Semitic conspiracy theory. And they relate it to the German Nazis talking about cultural Bolshevism. Well, the thing is, you're right. Okay, on one hand, they're right. Right, the Nazis did talk about cultural Bolshevism. They did, defend socially conservative things and accuse the communists of being socially liberal, which they were. That's true, but there's more to it than that. And there are a couple of things that need to be said about quote unquote cultural Marxism, I guess. So here's the thing, right? Marxism is an entire ideology, it's an entire worldview. Marxism views history like a train, speeding forward. The train is constantly moving forward, history is advancing. We've gone from hunter gatherer civilization, which was the majority of human history. From there, we advanced to, eventually owning land and domesticating animals. And first there was the system of slavery, and then there was the system of feudalism. And now capitalism is the next stage, and that eventually capitalism will give way to socialism, and socialism will eventually give way to communism, right? That's the Marxist historical materialist understanding of history. And that what's driving history forward is class struggle, the struggle between classes, and the struggle to raise the level of material abundance and to advance the means of production, to make a more productive and comfortable life for human beings. And there is an aspect of Marxism that is what you could call deconstruction, right? For example, it's long believed that what you might call the nuclear family is the eternal, glorious way families have always been. It's always been one man, one woman, and multiple children. That's just the way it's always been. And Marx, and Frederick Engels more especially, in his book The Origin of the Family, Private Property and the State, deconstructs that. He shows that this idea that there's this sacred family unit that has always been the same is not true. Originally, during the hunter-gatherer times, there was no family. There were tribes of 30 people, and they were all kind of a family. And they might have had exclusive partners, they might not have. There was no institution of marriage, and they weren't even really keeping track of whose kid was whose kid. That was hunter-gatherer. The majority of human history, there was no real family. There were tribes of roughly 20 to 30 people running around the woods hunting and gathering. Then you had the origin of private property, and that the first incarnation of the family was you had one landowning man, and he had sex with any women that were his property, and the children were his property, and that way you could keep track of who got the land after he died, right? Well, now, fast forward, now we have one man, one woman. I know in some parts of the world they still have polygamy, but in the West we have monogamy. And that now, increasingly in the West, we have gay marriage, right? We have men and men, women and women. And that Marxism is deconstructing the myth that there has always been one sacred family and that this is just the sacred way that it is. That's deconstruction, right? Marxism is also deconstructing capitalism, right? Capitalism says the rich are rich because they work so hard and they're so great, and the poor are poor because they're lazy bums and they need to get a job, or they're just not as smart as the rich people or whatever. Marxism deconstructs that, right? Marxism, in a lot of ways, is a deconstructive ideology, especially if you get into Leninism and the theory of imperialism, this notion that the West is better just because it's better, right? Just, the reason that all the developing countries are poor and the West is rich is because the West just is the best, and these countries around the world, all the poor people are just lazy and stuff. They used to teach that in school, right? That in the it was commonly taught in the schools in the 50s that the reason people are poor in Central America and Africa is because it's too hot and the people are just lazy. It's too hot, right? That's not true, right? But that's what people used to believe. Marxism deconstructs that. So that's an aspect of Marxism. That is an aspect of Marxism, is that it deconstructs the myths of Western civilization. The belief that the family is eternal, the belief that the West is supreme and it's survival of the fittest and the other countries are just inferior people who deserve to be colonized. It deconstructs the idea that the capitalists are good because they just have more money and they work hard and everyone else is lazy. It deconstructs. That's only an aspect of Marxism. That's what's missing here. Okay? If you just take that from Marxism, that the family is not eternal, If you just take all that stuff I went over, you still don't. That's not Marxism. If you just have that, right? You can understand everything I just said and not be a Marxist. Marxism takes that into account. And it takes an honest understanding of world history, of understanding that certain things are not eternal, that history is advancing through stages, right? And that history is moving forward. And it argues that we need to continue moving forward, and that the way to move forward is for the major centers of economic power, the banks, factories, and industries, the commanding heights of the economy, to be publicly controlled so that we can continue to raise the level of productive forces, continue to raise people up out of poverty, and march toward communism, the ultimate stage, the final stage of history, where there is so much material abundance and technology has advanced so much that people can just live a comfortable life and do what they feel like doing and take what they want and need, and that there is no coercion, right? Is that communism is about understanding the material reality of how history works and utilizing it to get to a higher stage in order to reach something bigger. That's Marxism, right? History's challenge is how Marxists generally refer to it, as history's challenge, right? Is that the working class, the class with nothing to lose but its chains and a whole wide world to win, must rise up and seize control of the means of production, operate the economy in a rational way, have a society that is much more rationally organized and much more controlled, and as a result, build a much better life for everyone, right? And that's what Marxism is. And that the deconstructive aspect, that's like background noise, right? That's just saying how we are where we are today. Why does the family exist? Why does capitalism exist? What existed before? Where are we going? But if you just take from Marxism deconstruction, it's not really dangerous. It's not, right? And that during the 1960s, really starting during the 50s, 60s, and 70s, a section of the American capitalist ruling class and a section of the European capitalist ruling class didn't have a problem with the deconstructive aspects of Marxism and actually found them to be quite useful, right? It used to be illegal in most countries, or in a lot of the world, it used to be illegal to have pornography, for example, right? And it was said, look, pornography is indecent, sex should take place within the context of a monogamous family. Well, Marxism comes along and says, well, actually, the family hasn't always been around, and lo and behold, pornography is legal, and a lot of capitalists can make a lot of money from pornography, right? There's many examples of this, where Marxism, the deconstructive aspect of Marxism was utilized by sections of the ruling class, right, for their own ends. And the rest of Marxism was completely ignored. And the most blatant example of this would be the infamous Congress for Cultural Freedom program. It was launched by the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency in 1951. And it was a program where the U.S. CIA started funding Marxism and Marxist things that they thought were anti-Soviet. They started trying to construct a left among scientists, among artists, among intellectuals and college professors. They started trying to construct a left that was, in essence, it was a left that was anti-Soviet. And that was basically what they were trying to do. And the man that they hired to do it was Sidney Hook. And Sidney Hook was a former Trotskyite, and he started to argue. He was really anti-communist, and they hired him. CIA hired him, and this is all on their website. I mean, if you don't believe me, go to Google right now, type in Congress for Cultural Freedom. Among the things that come up will be CIA.gov, and they brag about this. They consider that the Congress for Cultural Freedom is one of their most successful programs that they started. And what they essentially did was they constructed a left that was anti-Soviet and was not a threat to Western capitalism. They funded art galleries. They used the art of Jackson Pollock. And they were able to, on the one hand, prevent, any kind of pro-Soviet mass movement of emerging in the West. But on the other hand, they were able to use the kind of cultural freedom and all of that to kind of build up a base of pro-Western thinkers and intellectuals in the Soviet bloc. And that's basically what happened, right? And it was the Congress for Cultural Freedom program. And basically what that involved, in essence, was developing a Marxist cultural critique, a Marxism that is focused on deconstruction and nothing else. A Marxism that simply focuses on deconstruction and opposes any actually existing socialism, but also opposes any form of construction itself. And like, for example, right? The Marxist understanding of what fascism is, right? Georgy Dimitrov says fascism is nothing but the open terroristic dictatorship of the most reactionary wing of the ruling class, right? The Trotskyites talk about fascism being a mobilization of the middle class radicalism to defend the system. That fascism is something that the left generally opposes. Well, in 1975, you have Susan Sontag, the writer for the New York Review of Books. And Susan Sontag is, in her history, the first place she was published, I believe, was the CIA's, Partisan Review, which was a CIA program, a Marxist magazine funded by the CIA, and by the Congress for Cultural Freedom, Partisan Review. Susan Sontag, a leftist intellectual in the United States who was part of the CIA Congress for Cultural Freedom program. They funded and published her work. 1975, she writes an essay. And she writes it for the New York Review of Books, and she's reviewing Leni Riefenstahl. That's Leni Riefenstahl. She made Triumph of the Will. She's like a Nazi filmmaker. And she's, of course, she's no longer a Nazi, and she's made a photo essay book about African tribes. And it's called like Nubia or something like that, right? And so Leni Riefenstahl writes it, or I'm sorry, not Leni Riefenstahl, Susan Sontag writes a review of Leni Riefenstahl's photo essay on these African tribes, right? And if you read this essay by Susan Sontag, she's saying that Leni Riefenstahl's photos of these African tribes having wrestling matches, dancing, hunting, living their life in Africa, she says that these photos that Leni Riefenstahl took of them are fascist. They're fascist photos. It's fascist art. And her arguments about why these photos of African tribes, living their everyday lives, having wrestling matches, having weddings, why is it fascist? Well, according to Susan Sontag, the reasons she gives are eerie. It's fascist because it promotes a, quote, family of mankind. You shouldn't want a family of mankind. You should want only individuals. If you want a family of mankind, you're a fascist. What else? What other reason is it fascist? Well, it promotes courage. Courage, right? In these African tribes, when there was wrestling matches and hunting, they promoted courage. And promoting courage, fascist. What else? It promotes, a collective will. Collective will. Groups of people working together to achieve ultimate aims. Fascist. Now, I don't want to ramble on too long about all of this, and I've got an upcoming book. I'm not going to tell you all too much about it, but it'll be out soon. But in essence, if you look at Susan Sontag's essay about the fascist aesthetic, she's basically saying if you are not a liberal, right? If you believe in any kind of collectivism, if you believe in any notion of people working together, group identity, trying to move ahead, trying to achieve a goal, courage, family of mankind, you're a fascist. And she goes on in the essay to say that Eastern Europe, the Eastern Europeans are fascists, right? That the Eastern European socialist governments, and part of the fascism is gymnastics. Gymnastics. Why? She says gymnastics promotes physical fitness. There you go. Physical fitness is fascist, according to Susan Sontag, right? This notion that people should be physically fit, this notion that people should exercise together, which is a big trend in China now. It's actually, I just recently saw, the Chinese school, they're all dancing together on the break time. This notion of group dancing, group participation, people working together, according to Susan Sontag, according to what people would call, I don't know what you want to call it. I don't want to use the cultural Marxism thing because we know that, but according to the cultural left, people dancing together, people, people working together to achieve a goal, physical fitness, the promotion of courage, the notion of a family of mankind, the popular will, all of that's fascist. right? And that the only good thing in the world, according to these cultural left forces, these forces that really got their big boost from the CIA, according to what you can call the synthetic left, the left that was created and carefully set up by the U.S. government and other forces to make sure that no actual leftism emerged. According to that left, the only good thing is deconstruction, right? Deconstruction is what matters. And that's not what Marxism is about. Marxism is about construction. It's about raising the level of productive forces. It's with Marxism that China went from being one of the poorest countries in the world to being a global superpower. It's with Marxism that we first had space travel. It's with Marxism that the world's biggest power plants were built. It's with Marxism that LED lights were invented. It's with Marxism that the first cell phone was invented. It's with Marxism that so many amazing, beautiful millions of people lived out of poverty. But according to this distortion of Marxism that was carefully crafted by the U.S. government, all that Marxism should be good for is deconstruction, right? Tear down and create more radical individualism. As someone said in the comment section, it was peak liberalism. And I agree, it is peak liberalism. And that's essentially what passes for left these days. And no, it is not. It is not Marxism, right? That Marxism is about class struggle. It's about the proletariat. It's about unity. It's about moving history forward. So when people talk about cultural Marxism, they're wrong in the one sense. And when you hear Jordan Peterson and others, what they're talking about, what they're trying to say is that all the people they don't like are all bad, and it's because they're communists and they killed millions of people just like Stalin or something like that. That's what they're trying to say. But they are pointing toward an actual truth, which is that there is a distortion of leftist politics that is now operating in place of Marxism. There is people who have taken one aspect of Marxism, one aspect, the deconstructive aspect of what Marx said, and have blown it up into their entire ideology. That's all they believe in. They don't believe in socialism. They don't believe in class struggle. They don't believe in advancing historical progress. In fact, historical progress is one of the main things that most pseudo-leftists now don't believe in. They say that we've gone too far, that we all need to be poorer because it's bad for the environment, that human beings are a cancer ruining the earth, and that we're breathing too much and there's just too many of us and we're wasting too much energy. And it's really, most Marxists don't even believe in historical progress. I shouldn't say that. All actual Marxists believe in historical progress, but most of the left on the campuses these days doesn't believe in historical progress. That this culturally focused deconstructive tendency that kind of stemmed from the CIA's cultural work, and it's the Cultural Cold War is where this stuff was originated. That's where this stuff originated, with Sidney Hook, with the Congress for Cultural Freedom, with Jackson Pollock, with the Partisan Review magazine. That stuff has come to replace actual Marxism. And so these people are referring to these forces as cultural Marxists, recognizing that their overall critique of Western civilization is rooted in Marxism, but they're not recognizing that they left out the rest of Marxism, right? So there you go. I hope that was easy to understand. I was trying to break it down here, but it's it's weird because you get people that say, oh, cultural Marxism is just plain an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. I wouldn't say that. I mean, there are elements in it that are pointing toward an actual reality, that there was a distortion of leftist politics by the intelligence agencies, by the cultural Cold War, and you can read about it. And there's a lot of books coming out about this kind of thing, nowadays. There's a lot being published about the cultural Cold War and about the CIA's support for Partisan Review magazine, and the CIA's support for Jackson Pollock's paintings, and efforts to try and pick up left-wing themes and unleash them in a way that was not damaging. And that has created a pseudo-left. And now that the Soviet Union is gone, and now that there is not, class struggle politics, really, as a result of that, as a result of the lack of class struggle politics in international affairs, as a result of that, we now have this other thing that is walking around and calling itself the left. And that entity, that thing that's walking around, you can't call it actual Marxism, and people are calling it cultural Marxism. Well, it's not Marxism, but it's rooted in the distortion of Marxist politics. Wow, a lot we just went over there.